So the Treasury Department also issued licenses out to these gas companies: Chevron, Halliburton, Schlumberger Limited, General Electric's Baker Hughes Unit, and Weatherford International PLC.
Socialist dictator Nicolas Maduro, he stole the previous election. He locked up and he tortured anyone trying to unseat him. According to the Venezuelan constitution, it is 35-year-old Juan Guaido that is now the leader of that country. He was the leader of the country's Congress, and he is now the rightful president. But socialist dictator Maduro is still there clinging to power with the help of the Russians and the Cubans and the Iranians, the Chinese, you name it. All the people, by the way, that we don't get along with.
So there's more drama with this slow-motion Venezuela coup d'etat that's been going on. The Kamala Harris coup d'etat, the Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi coup d'etat on Venezuela. These are warmongers. Remember, Kamala Harris didn't prosecute any of the police who murdered unarmed or possibly innocent people. Of course not, because if you're a right-wing fascist, you can't do anything wrong. If you have unlimited power, if you've got absolute power, I'm sure you're not going to be corrupt absolutely.
So the video you're about to see is Donald Trump talking about 3 different interventions. One in Iraq, one in Syria, one in Libya. Take a look. There's no ambiguity here whatsoever. Here's what he says in regards to why we would be in these various places.
And then we pull out. Now, I took a lot of heat, except from conservative people. When we went over there, I said, hey, I assume we're taking the oil. Are we taking the oil? And people said, what a horrible thing to do. You know, in the old days, you had a war. You ever hear the expression, to the victor belongs the spoils? Okay? To the victor. And I took such heat. It actually was Al, it was at CPAC. I said, if we leave it, take the oil. At least pay us back. And I come out, front page news, oh, Trump is a horrible human being. He wants to take the oil from a sovereign country. Sovereign. Give me a break. You see the people ripping off sovereign. Hey. Take back the oil.
So Juan Guaido. Juan Guaido is the 35-year-old superstar in America who the American government is trying to get this international diplomacy thing and with the threat of military force. So the threat of military force is very real, and the people of Venezuela should be a little bit nervous, because this is the rhetoric that you start to speak before you invade. Now, Juan Guaido, his last name is spelled with a G. Why is there a G in his name? Guaido? Guaido, G-U-A-I-D-O. The G is pronounced Y. G, that's stupid. So Juan Guaido, he says that the 2018 elections were illegally rigged, right? We've heard that before. The elections were rigged as the DNC rigged the election against Bernie Sanders. Tulsi Gabbard wanted 20 debates, not just a 6. Why would the DNC only agree to 6 debates? Because Hillary Clinton is an awful candidate, and the more debates the DNC had, the more likelier the American people would see how wicked that psychopath truly is.
Once you go over and take back that oil, they have nothing.
But how do you take it back?
Right, you have to go in. You have to go in.
With ground troops?
Well, you bomb the hell out of them, and then you encircle it, and then you go in, and you let Mobil go in, and you let our great oil companies go in.
Juan Guaido says that the Venezuelan Constitution says if the president's job, if the office is vacant, then the National Assembly's head should take over. He boycotted the last election. So since he boycotted the last election, he's saying that there is no president. There is no president right now in Venezuela. He boycotted the election. He didn't win the election. He boycotted. And then he says, well, that's not fair. The election is bullcrap, so there really isn't a president. And if there is no president, then therefore he's the president. Now, the actual line of succession is similar to the U.S. You got the president, and then the vice president, and then the president of the Venezuelan Congress. So it goes to the House, right? Third in line would be Nancy Pelosi. So Juan Guaido is the third heartbeat away from the presidency, but he's not the president. He's not the president. Juan Guaido, his constitutional argument is that he boycotted the 2018 election, just like 56% of the Americans boycotted the 2016 election. Therefore, he gets to get power. So then those 56% of the Americans who boycotted the 2016 election, should they become the American president? If you boycott an election, you get to become president. So my neighbor, Jojo, hey Jojo, did you know that if you didn't vote, right? Yeah, you get to become president. Yeah, all you got to do is declare it.
Pay us back. And I come out, front page news, oh, Trump is a horrible human being. He wants to take the oil from a sovereign country. Sovereign. Give me a break. You see the people ripping off sovereign. Take back the oil.
Since we're just self-declaring ourselves president, shit, I'm the president of Venezuela. There you go, Donald. There you go, world. I just declared myself the president of Venezuela. And Uruguay, and Bolivia. There you have it, folks. I just declared myself the president. Now I got the same authority Juan Guaido has. There has been 3 nights of protest, which means that Juan Guaido, or the anti-Madurist, there is some popular support, but it's hard to gauge. So there's groups that are coming out. But you can't just declare yourself president. He declared himself the interim president. And he says it's in the Constitution. Which Constitution? The current Constitution of Venezuela, or the Constitution that the Constituent Assembly is working on? 365 Venezuelans were elected to the Constituent Assembly. Only 165 Venezuelans were elected to the National Assembly. So Juan Guaido, he ran as a congressman, and he won in 2015. So he got a congressional seat, and then he got elected leader of the Congress of Venezuela. But he never ran for president. He's never once ran for president. He hasn't got one single Venezuelan vote to become president. Juan Guaido is a complete unknown in Venezuela. The Venezuelan people didn't even know who Juan Guaido is. Who the hell is this Juan Guaido? He goes to another country and then he says that he's the president. He was elected the leader of the National Assembly on January 5th, 2019, 24 days ago.
They would have absolutely said, okay, 100%. In fact, they would have said, how about 75%? So, and isn't it sad? We could have had anything we wanted. We could have had 50% of those oil fields. You know, in the old days, when you had a war, it's to the victor belong the spoils.
So he was elected the leader of the National Assembly. The National Assembly, which is Venezuela's Congress or Parliament, their National Assembly is unicameral, and the U.S. Congress is bicameral, meaning that Juan Guaido is the same if you were to combine the two houses. So if you combine Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi, that is who Juan Guaido is. He's the leader of Congress. And so you take Mitch McConnell and you put him in as president because Canada says, you know, Donald's not the real president and Mitch is for what the fuck ever reason because they want to take our oil. Would you accept that, America? Would you accept that? Mitch isn't the president. Mitch wasn't elected to be president. Why is Canada making us bow down to Mitch McConnell as the brand new emperor?
Immediately go into Libya, knock this guy out very quickly, very surgically, very effectively, and save the lives. After it's all done, we go to the protesters who end up running the country. They're going to like us a lot better than they will if we don't do it. More importantly, we're going to save lives. And we should then say, by the way, from all of your oil, we want reimbursement. We should have said, we'll help you, but we want 50% of your oil.
So Juan Guaido is not the president. He's not the interim president. He's just a self-declared president. He's the leader of the legislators, which means he's got one legislative branch, but he's a complete unknown. The Venezuelan people don't even know who the fuck Juan Guaido even is. In 2015, Juan Guaido won the National Assembly seat with 97,000 votes. So 97,000 people know who he is in a country of millions. 30 million? So the National Assembly is the equivalent of the U.S. Congress in Venezuela. Now, I don't want to give a rosy picture of Venezuela. It's a shit show. They have a lot of food prices have gone up and oil prices have gone down, so their economy, there's hyperinflation, and some old-time diseases are making a comeback. 1/10 of the population, 3 million Venezuelans, have immigrated out of Venezuela. So there's several reasons for why this has happened. The food distributors are private corporations who import most of their food products. The food distributors take Venezuela's oil's money to pass out food. So they profit. They take the money to profit themselves. So you got this big bureaucratic mess where they're buying all this from the government, right? The government is paying for all this, but it's going to private corporations. And then there was also the artificial dropping of international oil prices. That has also hurt the Venezuelan economy. So the one good thing, I guess, about being friends with Saudi Arabia is we can get Saudi Arabia to lose money, to go into debt, to flood the entire world with a bunch of cheap oil.
Once you go over and take back that oil, they have nothing.
But how do you take it back?
Right, you have to go in. You have to go in.
With ground troops.
Well, you bomb the hell out of them, and then you encircle it, and then you go in, and you let Mobil go in, and you let our great oil companies go in.
Right.
Once you take that oil, they have nothing left. But the people will appreciate it, and they should pay us back. But we have to go in to save these lives. We should do on a humanitarian basis.
And apparently that's what Ronald Reagan did to make the Soviet Union collapse, because their state government, a lot of their funding came from their oil sales. So when there was a lot of cheap oil, then the Soviet Union couldn't make a bunch of money. The same sort of thing is happening with Venezuela. Venezuela has either the largest or the third largest oil fields in the world. I heard both of them. The largest, the third largest, they have a shit ton of oil, right? And we don't control it. And it's all about the damn oil. $7 billion. This whole thing is about how Donald Trump, by executive order, stole $7 billion from the Venezuelan people and government. We've taken Venezuela's cash. We've taken Venezuela's property. And why? Because Donald Trump wrote an executive order, and then he passed it to the Treasury Department, and the Treasury says, well, you wrote it on a piece of paper. This must be the law.
So we could have had something special. When the so-called rebels came to us, we should have said, fellas, we're going to help you. We want 50% of your oil. They would have said, thank you very much. We have a deal. Write it down. Sign it. We have a deal. We would have been a rich nation again. They have tremendous oil reserves in Libya. Instead, we help. We get nothing. We're very, very foolishly led.
That's ruling by presidential decree. Executive orders is ruling by presidential decree. So when people criticize Maduro of being a dictator, well, he runs by presidential decree, because when he was elected in 2013, the National Assembly ceded their authority, and they said it was okay for Maduro to run by presidential decree. How did Donald get his powers of presidential decree, of running by executive order, everything by executive order? Didn't he run against executive orders? Now he's Mr. Executive Order, plus the unlimited war powers. So you can't call Maduro a dictator without calling Donald a dictator. So the artificial dropping of international oil prices has hurt the Venezuelan economy. The food distributors, being private corporations, has hurt their economy. Also, the sanctions, the United States has put sanctions. The United States has been working on sabotage. The CIA, there's been a lot of organization. A lot of things has happened, okay? A lot of things has happened. And I want to get to the recent crisis, but you got to understand this Juan Guaido, or Juan Guaido. So Juan Guaido, there is, discontent with Maduro. There's widespread discontent for Maduro. His approval numbers are probably right there with Donald's. But the opposition parties have even lower numbers. The opposition to the National Assembly has 70% disapproval. Most of the country does not give a shit about the branch of government that Juan Guaido even controls. 70% of the country doesn't give a shit about the legislative branch of Juan Guaido. So with 70% disapproval, brand new face, out of nowhere, no presidential election, he's the president. And then there's 80% disapproval with the opposition party. So the opposition party has higher disapproval numbers than Maduro. So Maduro sucks, right? But so does all the opposition. So does the National Assembly. So does Juan Guaido. So does the opposition parties. It's just a real shit show all across the board.
I think that that's exactly right in the sense that Nicolas Maduro, though extremely unpopular, does have a solid floor, around 30% of the population. He is unpopular, but the opposition is equally or more unpopular than Maduro. It's a data analysis, which is an opposition-aligned pollster, released a poll in October, which showed that the National Assembly, who is now headed by Juan Guaido, has a 70% disapproval rating. Opposition parties have disapproval ratings of up to 80%. So the majority of the Venezuelan public may reject Maduro, but they equally represent a largely ineffectual U.S.-backed opposition leadership, which they not only perceive as incapable of really bringing about real change, but not actually having their interests at heart, given that most of these leaders are, as Juan Guaido, educated in elite universities. Juan Guaido was at George Washington University. He also studied at the neoliberal IESA think tank, with the home of Venezuela's Chicago Boys. That these people are not, they have not been to the barrios. They're not in touch with people's ordinary problems.
So Venezuela, they need to get their shit together. So this is a crisis. It's a crisis for Venezuela. It's an internal political crisis. Maduro has survived 6 coup d'etats just from last year, so Maduro's a survivor. Hugo Chavez survived a coup d'etat by the U.S. government against the same advisor, Elliot Abrams. Elliot Abrams is the person who is Donald's point man on Venezuela. His advisor is Elliot Abrams, and Elliot Abrams is the guy who backed death squads in Latin America that murdered thousands for right-wing dictators. He lied to Congress to cover up Iran-Contra, and he led the 2002 U.S. coup d'etat against Venezuela. Elliot Abrams has already attempted a coup d'etat against Venezuela, and that's the man that Donald Trump is listening to.
Once again. Joining us now for the very latest on what's going on inside Venezuela, we go directly to Caracas. Lucas Corner is a correspondent who's been diligently covering this story for us. He's with Venezuela Analysis. Lucas, thanks so much for joining us. Please get us started by describing what the situation there is right now on the ground in Venezuela.
Well, right now, Juan Guaido is speaking in the east of the city among supporters, once again calling on the military to overthrow Maduro, as well as making other announcements. Meanwhile, life continues as normal in most parts of the city. Businesses are open, people are buying things, people are going about their business without any real interruptions, although, as if nothing had happened the past 3 days, despite the violence that we've seen the past few nights.
So you're going to see all the same actors and all the same players of the 2002 U.S. coup d'etat. Who was on the payroll, right? That's what we go around, the CIA. We pay the CIA to go around destabilizing governments all across the world. So we've been trying to sabotage Venezuela for the, entire millennium. The 2000, since 2002. And we have no moral superiority. 73% of the world's dictators, we support them. We support dictatorships. We support free force. 73% of the world's dictators. This isn't about democracy. More Americans voted for Hillary than Donald. How come that democracy didn't work? You'd think the person who got the most votes would get the presidency, but we got the Electoral College, which is a bunch of cheated bullets to refine the vote in case the people get, messed up, and then the elites will change it, just like the super delegates. And then the gerrymandering, then the 46% turnout rate, which means that 54% of the American people, the majority of the American people, boycott their own American elections. Plus, there's a lack of instant runoff voting. We don't have a great democracy. We only get a tiny flash of democracy. The only state in this entire country that has a good functioning democracy that is fair is Maine. Only Maine has a good democracy. So don't believe that this is about democracy and freedom, that we want to care about the poor Venezuelan children. We don't even give a shit about the poor American children, let alone Venezuelan children. No, this is about oil, this is about power, this is about empire, this is about hegemony, this is about Venezuela being a socialist country, and it's setting a bad example for the kids. Look, we got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. What's next? Are we going to get more of these Democratic Socialists elected? Is Bernie Sanders going to become the next president? Oh, man. We've got to get rid of Venezuela so that way everybody hates the idea of socialism. Isn't that the biggest scourge on the earth?
Well, Juan Guaidó was speaking to an opposition march in the east of the city, in the middle-class eastern part of the city, when he made this self-swore himself in as president of Venezuela. Of course, the reaction among his supporters was jubilant and enthusiastic, though they're, among the 6 million people who voted for President Nicolas Maduro, evidently there's, a sense of rejection and confusion of how this previously unknown figure, who was just elected by the National Assembly on the 5th of January and was unknown to the country beforehand, who won 97,000 votes in 2015.
So I'm getting to the $7 billion in a second. So John Bolton, he floated the idea that we're going to send 5,000 troops to Colombia. He wrote it real big on his notepad. The media freaked out. They thought that they caught him, but he's holding his notebook like, real obvious, so everybody, he knows the cameras are there, so they know he wrote it real big, and so that's a very smart way to leak it, right? The media thought they got him, but really John Bolton got the media. So we're going to send 5,000 troops to Colombia. That's how we're going to make some moves, right? We're going to put a bunch of troops right up on Venezuela's border because Colombia is America's bitch. When the United States government said, let's go ahead and, topple one of your South American friends, Colombia's like, okay, we'll do it. So we can land our military in Colombia whenever the fuck we feel like it. Colombia's our bitch. In fact, while it's about 50-50 for world support, so several nations in this hemisphere support Donald and Kamala and Nancy Pelosi's coup d'etat on Venezuela. We can land our military in all these nations by permission because they bowed down to us so quickly. So it's interesting that Jamaica and Bolivia and Mexico were opposed to the coup d'etat on Venezuela, but it's also interesting that Canada, Trudeau, so that in Canada supposed to be nicer than America, but immediately that Trudeau, his knees went down to the ground immediately. Okay, Mein Führer, whatever you say, Mein Führer. So Canada, Haiti, Brazil's being ran by a right-wing fascist Hitler. So no surprise that Brazil would support Donald Trump's coup d'etat. Brazilian Hitler, that fucking Hitler motherfucker in Brazil, the badass Dilma Rousseff was pushed out, and it was coordinated by CIA and D.C. and Wall Street. Same forces that are about to push Maduro out are the ones that pushed Dilma Rousseff out of Brazil. And then once you pushed out this socialist Dilma Rousseff, you get a Brazilian Hitler. So is that what this Juan Guaidó is going to get? Is he a Hitler? What kind of economic policies? What does he even stand for? He's trying to get the military to overthrow his president so he can become president. That's, would we celebrate that if somebody did that here? Brazil went from socialist to Mussolini by political shenanigans. And if capitalism is such a great policy, why couldn't you just let countries decide to be capitalist themselves? Why must the U.S. government imperialize capitalism upon other people who don't want it? If it's a good program, it would just pick up on its own, but we feel the need that we can kill people and murder and invade nations just because they think of a different economic system than we do.
He's just getting his marching orders from Washington.
So Guaidó is not visible right now. He's, other than the first declaration he made where he announced himself the interim president, he generally hasn't been seen out in the street since then.
After he made that self-swearing in on Wednesday afternoon, he was not seen in public until this afternoon when he gave his press conference.
Are we even allowed to think about different economic ideas here? Back in the 50s, they were throwing communists in jail just for being communists. But we can park our military. I mean, Haiti's our bitch country. Brazil's our bitch country. Canada's our bitch country. Colombia's our bitch country. So, I mean, that's, I don't know if that's fantastic, but that's quite interesting. Those countries folded immediately. Were they going to stand up against, right versus wrong, or were they going to say, hey, that's their country? They're like, nope, they said, we'll go ahead and we'll support you. We'll support you. Hell, you want some troops here? You want to park your military here? Nah, go ahead. Set up shop. So to do a quick little recap, all this shit started on Thursday, and this is the same day that Tulsi Gabbard denounced it. So Donald Trump, he's, on the shitter, and he tweets out, we're going to coup d'etat Venezuela. So Donald Trump tweets that they're going to coup d'etat. Tulsi Gabbard says we don't need to go to Venezuela. Bernie Sanders says no war in Venezuela. Then Maduro, the president of Venezuela, orders 72 hours. He orders all the U.S. diplomats to leave. So basically all the Americans in the U.S. embassy and any Americans in the country, they got 72 hours to leave after Donald says there's a coup d'etat on its way. All non-emergency personnel were ordered by the U.S. government to leave. Non-emergency personnel. So the military could stay, but all non-emergency. Eventually, he backed down on that, and Maduro says, okay, they got 30 days to leave. Somebody in the government said they'll never leave the U.S. embassy. If there's a war, I'm pretty sure the U.S. Embassy would be the first place they attack.
No, the atmosphere is definitely kind of an eerie calm in that sense that people reject although there has been violence in various communities in the last 3 nights, the overwhelming majority of Venezuelans, they lived through the violence of 2014, the violence of 2017. They don't want their communities to be destroyed, their public and private property to be damaged, infrastructure, etc. They're not taking part in these violent protests. And the desire of most Venezuelan people is to have their most pressing everyday issues resolved and not have any kind of violent outcome, which is very real given the escalation that the United States is pushing right now.
In fact, it would probably be very simple, right? It's one building. So that's some of the drama that's been happening recently. Maduro says you need to get out, and some of them left, and then he said, nah, you got more days. You don't just have 3 days. You got 20 more days, and the government was like, well, we weren't going to leave anyways, but we already ordered non-emergency personnel, so we already evacuated half of the people. Now, something big that's been happening, the Bank of England denied Maduro $1.2 billion of his own gold. The country, Venezuela, put gold into the Bank of England. Venezuela's been finding oil, they've been finding gold. So essentially the rest of the world is recognizing that Venezuela could be its own economic powerhouse one day. They're, how much gold are they going to dig up? $5, $6, $10 billion worth of gold? And the Bank of England, that's pretty fucking shady as shit. If I put $1.2 billion worth of gold into your bank and then you said I can't get my gold back, I would be furious. I would be like, what the fuck is going on? This is Washington, D.C., this is the U.S. government's plan. The Wall Street Journal reported that the U.S. government gave Juan Guaido, the Venezuelan accounts in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and other U.S. insured banks. So we're giving all this property, all the $7 billion of cash and property in the United States, and we're giving it to this Juan Guaido. So the United Kingdom, England is on our side. They're on our government's side, and they're saying Maduro can't have $1.2 billion of his own gold, and they're trying to give all the money to Juan Guaido. I don't know if the Bank of England did that, but that's what we're doing here. And that's particularly relevant because of what happened yesterday. What happened yesterday, January 28th, 2019, on Monday, was the U.S. government stole $7 billion. I wonder if it was for the wall funding, but they stole $7 billion of Venezuela's assets. And they're blocking all the exports, so they're not going to make any money from us buying their gas and oil anymore. So they're going to lose $11 billion over the next year, and they're losing $7 billion in their property right now.
I think it's really important to note that things are not going to plan as Washington had foresaw it. Really, this coup, as we're seeing in progress, has hit roadblocks. I mean, as is indicated by the fact that you did not have the massive unanimous international response they were going for. You have countries like Mexico and Uruguay calling to mediate. You have the and most importantly, the armed forces, despite how many times Juan Guaidó calls on them to overthrow Maduro, remain with the constitutionally elected president. And that is a key factor in maintaining this government. So the fact that Juan Guaidó, that Mike Pompeo backtracked on his initial refusal to withdraw U.S. diplomatic personnel and are now withdrawing some of them, that's a huge change in U.S. policy. And clearly there is chaos in Washington with regard to what is the next move, on the ground, because they clearly are unable to unseat Maduro, at this time.
So the anti-Maduro people, the CIA, DC, and the Wall Street people have been organizing this for months, if not years. Juan Guaidó went to Brazil and Colombia. He went up through all these U.S. government-friendly nations to let them know what he was planning. And also Juan Guaidó has been trying to get the military to turn on Maduro. But most of the military has been loyal so far to Maduro. Most of the military. So Maduro is getting the test of his life.
Yet you have hundreds of thousands of people in Venezuela that are taken to the streets demanding he leave office immediately.
But even though this Juan Guaidó is taking all of his money and his property, that's not located in Venezuela, the Venezuelan government still has the military. They got the Supreme Court. They got the National Election Council. They got the Constituent Assembly. They got the executive branch. They got the oil company, the PTVSD or whatever, and the military. So they got a lot of groups of people that they also got the Chavistas, and they got armed gangs and lots of Soviets and proletariats who have been organizing amongst themselves.
So how does this play out? Well, National Security Advisor John Bolton telling me exclusively that Nicolas Maduro, despite reports, has actually lost the support of much of his military. Watch.
Maduro can't count on them to follow his orders. So there are extensive discussions going on by members of the National Assembly with the military. This is still very much in play, and it's one reason why today here in Washington we've been looking at ways to disconnect Maduro from the financial resources he needs to pay the military and otherwise keep himself in power.
So it'll never go back before Hugo Chavez. It will never go back before 1999. So Hugo Chavez has changed Venezuela for good, forever, for the better. There were 2 deflections, some Venezuelan general who's in the U.S. Embassy, so that he's got to be, feeling weird. What a turncoat, right? So you go to a U.S. Embassy and you're like, you know what? I don't like the government of Venezuela. People here, all you got to do is criticize the government, and they're like, what? You a hater? What, you anti... So the guy's name is Luis Silva, the Venezuelan general in the U.S. Embassy. So he's anti-Maduro, but he's in the U.S. Embassy. So what are you doing in the U.S. Embassy? Oh, you're deflecting? Okay. But that was pretty big news, right, for a General Luis Silva. And there was also 27 National Guardsmen who stole weapons, and they declared themselves to be in rebellion, but they had been arrested. So 27 soldiers tried to start the revolution. One general is sitting in the U.S. Embassy, hoping that the U.S. will protect him if the war starts. And that's it. The rest of the military, it's been pretty quiet and calm, and they've been loyal to Maduro.
So what will it take for Venezuela's illegitimate dictator to actually step down? Well, we are asking one of the country's most prestigious and internationally celebrated anti-Maduro leaders, a statesman who's been forced into exile, a man who actually had the position that Guaidó now has before becoming president, Mr. Julio Borges. It's so good to have you here. Thank you so much for being back on the program. Let me ask, because you were there in 2002 when Chavez was unseated for a couple of days and then wound up back in power. What needs to happen so that you don't have a repeat of 2002 Mr. Borges, and how do you get the military on the side of Juan Guaido?
Well, that's a very clever question, Tricia.
Okay, now the $7 billion. So this has been called a de facto oil ban, but it looks very de jure to me. It looks very real to me. So they're going to block the regime from exporting oil and getting paid for it. So the way that they worded it, they made it sound like Venezuela, you could sell all the oil that you want, but just don't give it to Maduro. Don't give it to the government of Venezuela. So what does that mean? That means that Venezuela can't do anything. So they're all connected to the oil firm of Venezuela. So we did this. Our government, Donald Trump, signs an executive order telling the Treasury Department head, Steve Mnuchin, to go ahead and take Venezuela's properties. So all the PDVSA, that's the oil company, the PDVSA, all their assets are frozen in the U.S. Their cash, their property. They got 3 oil refineries along the Gulf of Mexico. The Citgo Petroleum, there's 3 Citgo refineries along the Gulf of Mexico. So those are ours now. The American government went ahead and took Citgo over. The American government is probably going to take Valero over too, because Valero is also a gas company that's known to benefit Venezuela. So they are stealing $7 billion of Venezuela's assets, and they're also reducing the Venezuelan exports by $11 billion over the next year if this ban, if this sanction holds up. So they're taking over Citgo Petroleum, but apparently the companies can operate it, corporations, private capital, rich people can own these companies, but none of the money can go to Maduro's government. So that's a sanction. They are blocking the government from getting or selling their oil. I want to say one third of our gas or 1/3 of their exports, 1/3 of something, a shit ton of oil is bought by America, is exported from Venezuela, imported into the United States.
Thank you. Listen, there is a different world from 2002 to 2019. First of all, the main support for Chavez and Maduro was the oil revenue that now has dropped and the industry has been destroyed. The second one has been the Army Force. Currently, the support of the Army Force is so small. Maduro only depends on 8 generals. I can give you the names of those generals, and the rest of the Army Force is completely against Maduro. In the last year has been 6 different coups d'etat against Maduro.
So Maduro, of course, said it was a robbery, which it is. The United States is stealing $7 billion. The government is stealing $7 billion from Venezuela. The PDVSA oil company president, the state oil company of Venezuela, President Manuel Quevedo, will take legal actions in the United States and in international courts. But Marco Rubio, he tweeted, a lot of fucking tweeters out here, a lot of keyboard warriors. Marco Rubio, a bunch of keyboard warriors, going to send real warriors to face real life and death situations while these keyboard warriors don't do shit. Marco Rubio, who represents a bunch of deflected Venezuelans, so just like the Cubans who were kicked out by the communists, who fought against the communists, they're like, oh, I hate you, communist. You shouldn't have fought against them. Why were you killing what did the communists do to you? Why'd you need to murder a bunch of communists? So Marco Rubio represents a region where there's a bunch of deflected Venezuelans. He called the Maduro crime family. He said that they're mafia and they've been stealing, and who gives a damn with the Maduro crime family because they're mafia and they're corrupt. And he says this without the slightest bit of hypocrisy. He said it with a straight face, right? Because paying yourself at Mar-a-Lago and paying Secret Service to stay in your hotels, that's okay. That's moral and ethical. So the Treasury Department also issued licenses out to these gas companies. Chevron, Halliburton, Schlumberger Limited, General Electric's Baker Hughes Unit, and Weatherford International PLC.
That's why this same poll showed that 86% of Venezuelans say that the number one issue is either the economy or social issues like crime, access to social services. So the issue is not necessarily overthrowing the government, because they don't view that as resolving those issues. Though definitely there is immense discontent and dissatisfaction with the leadership of Nicolas Maduro.
Does Guaidó lose points with the Venezuelan people in the mere fact that he is being propped up by the United States?
I think that's definitely, I mean, with regard, especially from the basis of Chavismo, both those who continue to support Nicolas Maduro, but those who historically voted for Hugo Chavez, which is the majority of the population, this majority of the population, that 60%, according to data analysis pollster, who opposes U.S. sanctions, they don't view kindly upon the United States coming in, especially an extremely unpopular figure himself, Donald Trump, who has spoken nothing but terrible things about Latin American countries and their peoples, to come and appoint a president. You know, obviously that is very poorly viewed here in Venezuela. The question is, you know, Juan Guaidó, if I were Juan Guaidó right now and I wanted to be president of Venezuela, I would go to the barrio. Instead of hiding for 2 days, not being seen, I would be in the barrios, talking to people, making myself seen, and talking to people about their ordinary problems. He is not doing that. He clearly is.
So none of Maduro's people, none of Venezuela can make money, but Chevron can make some money, Halliburton can make some money, Dick Cheney's old corporation, Schlumberger Limited, whoever the hell that is, General Electric's Baker Hughes Unit, and Weatherford International PLC. Whoever the fuck these corporations are, but these corporations are people. Don't forget, these oil companies are human beings. So the Treasury Department is stealing Venezuela stuff, and then they're giving licenses to these companies saying that they could take the oil of Venezuela. So we already got the oil companies lined up, right? All you need now is the Marines. Send in the Marines to go kill a bunch of socialists because they had some internal political struggle that they were working on.
Of the army force is against Maduro. You can be sure about this statement. It's only a very small group, as any dictatorship in the world. So I think we are in a very important time in which we have to make very clear to this small group of military that they want to be part of the solution or they want to be still part of the problem. And this is something.
But help me understand, because I'm a results-oriented person, and I'm sure you are. I'm sure most people are, right? Let me see results. Give me results. If you look at the results of the Maduro presidency, it's been horrible. I mean, Venezuela's in really horrible shape while he's been president. I don't want to start a conversation whether it's his fault or somebody else's fault. Just results alone. So you would think, if I was to tell the people of Venezuela, okay, you have horrible results in your country, here's a possibility for a change, that they would all...
So the presence of the Cuban government behind Maduro is the main reason why Maduro is in power. So the support that Chavez has, oil, army force, and Cuba, Maduro only have Cuba and a small piece of the army force behind him.
So how do you see this playing out? You say most of the military, it sounds like you're very much in agreement with John Bolton on this. Actually, the rank and file support some change. As we just heard from General Dictator, it is really up to the military at this point, because they are going to be the ones to enforce whoever is going to Miraflores Palace. How do you convince those 8 people that are so close still to Nicolas Maduro to switch sides?
Yeah, I would like to be very clear, Tricia. This is a key issue, what you mentioned. 99%
of which countries have or have not agreed to recognize Guaidó. We're going to break it down for you on a map, as the U.S. has suggested that they do. So we offer all of this right here on The News with Rick Sanchez, because we are convinced, as we like to say, that it really is time to do real, balanced, and fair news.